So the three largest mental health facilities in the U.S. are Rikers, Cooks County, and L.A. Twin Towers jails. That's right, prisons. Prisons in the U.S. have become the largest mental health facilities by default because over the past 50 years, the country has slowly but surely gotten rid of mental health facilities, and they've been replaced with the ever-growing prison population. 2.2 million people in U.S. prisons, the largest prison population in the world. And these prisons are weird. They're semi-privatized. There's lots of violence, lots of drugs, lots of gangs. It's the strangest thing in the world. They're not cheap either. It's tons and tons of money being dumped into a system that doesn't work. Nobody thinks it works. Semi-private, so people are actually profiting from the prisons. It's a really wacky system, and there's lots of people trying to fix this. It's a very easy problem to ignore. These prisons and these jails tend to be in semi-remote locations, so it's pretty easy to go your whole life without running into one of them. I lived near a prison at one point. It was a very weird environment, and really quickly you understand that everyone working in and around the system knows that it's broken, but nobody knows how to fix it. My guest on this week's podcast is Dr. Rosenberg, a psychiatrist. He specializes in addiction and mental health, and he's got a new book out talking specifically about this mental health crisis that has been relegated to prisons and how we can potentially unwind it. If you're new here, I'm Lucas Rockwood. I'm the host of the show. I am a yoga teacher, a trainer. I am a nutritional coach. I'm a father. First and foremost, I'm a student, and I use this podcast as a way for me to go out in the world, find experts and leaders and big thinkers and yoga teachers and meditation teachers, and bring their best research to you to hopefully help you rethink the way that you're living, live a life more on purpose, and get some new ideas. Hope you enjoy the show. As always, your questions, comments, and feedback are most welcome. My ask for you is if you like this show, share it with 2 people. So hello and welcome everyone. Today's show is called Our Mental Health Crisis. I'm joined here with Ken Paul Rosenberg. Dr. Rosenberg is a psychiatrist with a specialty in addiction medicine at Upper East Health. He's the author of Infidelity and his newest book, Bedlam, an intimate journey into America's health crisis. Ken, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
You know, I've had a number of guests on the show talk about mental health, but no one, as soon as you sent me over your book, which I've dug into, really getting into it, and the first thing that jumped out at me, which nobody has said, is that our largest mental hospitals are jails, and that's never been presented to me. So explain to listeners what's going on.
Well, that's the whole purpose of the book, Bedlam, isn't it? I mean, that these are issues that are pressing, I would say the most pressing, or among the most pressing issues that we face as a nation. And surprisingly, they're the issues that we don't know much about. You know, people don't talk about mental illness. Our country doesn't talk much about it. And we have relegated those with serious mental illness to the worst conditions. You know, we closed down the institutions in the 60s as dreadful asylums, right? In the 1950s, 1960s, President Kenneth had a great idea to close them down. But we replaced them, or didn't replace them, with something worse. We let those people live on the streets. We have them live in the jails. And now the 3 largest mental institutions in this country, in other words, the 3 places that provide the most mental health care, are jails. Rikers Island, Cooks County Jail, L.A. Twin Towers, where I document the crisis in my book. And, you know, we've really abandoned these folks and send them to jail. It's kind of essentially become a crime to have a mental illness in America. You are 10 times more likely to be in a jail than a hospital if you're mentally ill. That makes sense, and people aren't aware of it. So that's why I wrote the book.
So mental health is an umbrella term, and within that people might throw anxiety, depression. People might also throw borderline personality and schizophrenia, which are very different. And so when you're talking about these jails, are you talking about the full umbrella as well, or are you talking about the more debilitating, lifestyle derailing mental health conditions, or is it not even is the distinction irrelevant?
It's a great question. It's a great question. You know, we distinguish between any mental illness and serious mental illness, and certainly people who in jail have mental illness, but 25% of them have serious mental illness. What are those? Bipolar disorder, severe depression, schizophrenia, those kinds of things that make you kind of relatively unable to function. Anxiety is a real problem. Mild depression, adjustment disorders are real problems. Personality disorders are real problems. But in the book, when we talk about mental illness, we're really trying to focus people on serious mental illness because it's much easier to talk about the less severe problems because those are, easier to talk about and they're easier to treat. And that's, you're not going to end up getting arrested because you have a small anxiety disorder. Again, if it's your anxiety disorder, it's pretty big, right? But that's not what's going to get you arrested. What's going to get you arrested is a lack of judgment or substance abuse. Substance abuse is not technically considered a serious mental illness, but I consider that as an addiction psychiatrist. I mean, look at the homeless population. It is estimated 80% of people who are homeless have a substance abuse issue, if not, serious problem. So, these are things that we're not paying attention to, and but the distinction between any mental illness and serious mental illness is a good one.
When I was a teenager, I had a close friend named Chris, and he was diagnosed with all kinds of things, ADD, bipolar, and was on Ritalin, was on lithium, and
right.
Not uncommon. I was a kid in the 90s, and most of us ended up on medications. I was on Prozac when I was 17 years old. There were books, Prozac Nation. It was kind of the medicate the teenage generation. And but me being on Prozac and him being on lithium was a very different story. And really early on, I was like, this is not going to go well for him. He's going to end up arrested or dead. And both of which happened. But I guess what I couldn't really back then, and when it happened, it was 20 years ago now. But when I was trying to parse out, I was like, I don't know what to do for this person. This person is dysfunctional. This person has not an amazing family, but definitely good enough. And no major traumas, this person is not well. And so I guess what I'm posing here as a question here is all of these people are in jail. That doesn't seem good. But I'm guessing you have a good solution or a good suggestion for a solution. When you think of a better scenario, is it the healthcare facilities we reinstate them or we create what are your thoughts?
Well, it's a very complicated question, and again, sorry to hear about your friend. Sound like he passed away, and that happens a lot. People with serious mental illness die constantly. In fact, they live 30 years fewer years than the rest of the population. So there's in the book we talk about many solutions. Yeah, and we talk about many things in Bedlam, but the one thing that we talk about in the book is have a conversation. This is America's great secret, right? This is not something we talk about. Even, your generation, even though everyone was on, what my kids used to call mental meds, they would go to, the school counselor would say, it's time for X number of kids to get their meds. Even that, we still don't talk about the serious problems, and it still is pretty much in the closet for families. So the first thing is to have a conversation. That is really critical. And after that, there are social policies we talk about in Bedlam quite a bit. We need more community mental health centers. We need the kind that could really accept sick people. They were built in the 60s, a few of them, not as many as President Kennedy hoped, but they weren't really able to take care of the sick people. We also need hospital beds. Per capita, we have about 2 to 3% of the hospital beds we need for psychiatry. In fact, there's something called the Imd Exclusion. It's a law that President Johnson put in effect. And that is if a general hospital has more than 16 psych beds, they won't be the beneficiaries of federal funding Medicaid. So what that means is President Johnson wanted to disincentivize the building of big asylums. I understand that. That's good. But as a consequence, we have very few hospitals with more than 16 psych beds. That doesn't make sense because if you look at the jails, we were just talking about the jails, right? In the jails in Twin Towers, there are 1,500 psych beds. Literally, there are 1,500 men in one tower of Twin Towers only because they have psychiatric needs. But we can't have a hospital for more than 16 beds. We'd have a jail. The sky's the limit. And in fact, in LA, they were trying to build a new jail just for mental health, just because they have so many people who should be in a hospital. Law enforcement says they should be in a hospital, but they end up in a jail. So they need more facilities, more jails to put them. And of course, we would like to see community mental health centers, hospitals, places of care and compassion, not punishment.
And what this policy, what is the thought? Is the thought like these are second-class citizens? Is the thought we don't know how to deal with this, so let's not deal with it? Or is there any underlying ideology behind it, or is it just
Yeah,
random?
I think second-class citizens would probably be, putting it kindly. I mean, these are people who we just walk by on the street and let die in the street. And we put them in jail when they become a bother to us. We need to make this a national priority, and we need policy that addresses it. There was something called the 21st Century Care Acts, passed in 2016. It really started to address this. There was something called the Parity Act that was enacted in 2010, which means that mental health care should be reimbursed by insurance companies on par with medical problems. Now, that law is on the books, and now we could sue insurance companies, which we're doing. And we're saying, hey, you'll provide, $1 million for a cardiac bypass surgery, but you won't, give more than 3.5 days for someone's hospitalization. How does that make sense? So we're trying to kind of, push back, but there are lots of policy recommendations I won't bore you with in the book Bedlam.
So you've dedicated your career largely to addiction and mental health, obviously. Is it all triage? I mean, do you have, is it all triage? Do you find stories where people have really, do you get excited? I mean, do you get excited about the possibility?
Do people do well? Is that what you're asking?
Do people get better? Yeah, do people get better?
Yeah, I love being an addiction psychiatrist. I really do, because addiction is one of the few things in medicine that we can really treat. We don't like to say cure because you're always in recovery and you just have to be sober. But you can really pretty much cure someone, because think about it. When someone comes to you addicted to opiates or addicted to gambling or addicted to sex or whatever their addiction is, and you can get them off of that thing, especially if it's drugs and alcohol, you now are changing their brain. You now are doing brain surgery, It's sort of so I meditate a lot. It's sort of like when you meditate, you change your brain. So so when you treat someone with an addiction, you can really change their brain and really restore them to sort of their, prior sanity, whatever that might have been. So I consider that, a great success. I love being an addiction psychiatrist. With serious mental illness, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and also most things in medicine, for that matter, you can't really kind of restore someone, unless it's the inflamed appendix. You yank it out, and then they're all good.
Yeah.
There are a few things in medicine that are that simple. Hypertension, cardiac disease, diabetes. These are lifelong conditions, and schizophrenia and bipolar disorder often are, not all the time, but often are as well.
And with addiction, I have a checkered past with chemical substances myself, and I have a lot of people close to me as well who have the same. And it's very difficult for me to parse out if the substance is the problem or if the problem leads to the substance. And I'm sure you've thought about this 100 ways until Tuesday. So, how do you, because I don't think of myself as an addict, and yet I've behaved like an addict many, many times. How do you, stopping was not the problem for me. That was never the problem. The problem was the problem. And how do you think about that in your practice?
I think everyone's different. I think, look, if you are high all the time and, addicted to opiates or drinking, like some of my patients, a liter of vodka every day, you got to get rid of that, right? Yeah. And that's a challenge in addiction treatment. I did say you normalize your brain. That's true. Biologically speaking, but psychologically speaking, you still have to deal with the same problems. And even biologically speaking, if you have a pre-existing anxiety disorder, depression, you have to deal with that too. So, so part of treatment is really dealing with, as they say in the rooms, the AA rooms, they say, you got to deal with life on life's terms, and that's really challenging. So I would say it's both things. You got to get rid of the thing that's making you mad, the opiates, the alcohol, whatever it is. And for some people, it's even weed that makes them mad. I mean, most people could drink, most people could smoke weed, but for a subpopulation, forget about it. You can't do it. So you got to get rid of those substances completely, 100%, be sober. And then you have to deal with whatever it is in your case, the underlying issues, psychological, biological issues you face. So it's both, and I think that's, again, what makes my profession, addiction psychiatry, so interesting, because, it's not just getting people to stop, it's kind of keeping them stopped and dealing with the underlying issue. There's getting sober, and then there's staying sober, and those are like two different things.
I'm glad you brought up marijuana. I'd love to hear your take on this legalization movement. I live in Barcelona, and it's been legalized here. My family's in Colorado. It's been legalized for quite a while. And I grew up with plenty of marijuana around. I don't really have an opinion about this legalization thing, except that everybody I talk to is so jazzed and excited about it. And I don't have that same kind of reaction.
Right.
And I just don't.
I don't either.
I'm not scared of it. I'm not scared of it. I'm very familiar with it. I'm not worried about my children being exposed to it. People smoke joints on the street here all the time, but I'm curious what you think of it, because you're in the trenches and you're seeing families torn apart, and of course it's a soft drug. There's not, but it's a drug. What are you seeing any changes since the legalization?
Alcohol. Probably it's more benign than alcohol, in fact, but that doesn't make it a good thing.
Doesn't make it a good thing. Yeah. That
doesn't qualify as a good thing. And, thank God we live in a democracy with personal autonomy and people can do what they want. I would say for a small subpopulation, there are people for whom even marijuana will open a window on a serious mental illness that would otherwise have been closed. And, of course, those are the people I worry about. For the vast majority of people, they could get high. In fact, in Vietnam, a lot of guys came back addicted to opiates, addicted to heroin. And very few of them remained heroin addicts. So even with heroin, just because you use it doesn't mean you're going to be an addict. But for a small population, it's a problem. The other problem I have with, weed, which, again, I'm for decriminalization for sure. It's horrible, right, what we've done with criminalizing people who smoke. But for some people, it's really quite a problem because we're administering it, if you will, to people with very vulnerable brains, right? Who smokes pot? People in their late teens or early 20s, right? Even early teens now. So now we're kind of exposing that population with developing brains, and you don't know who's at risk for serious mental illness and who's not, and we're exposing them to, mind-altering drugs. I don't think that's a great experiment.
Unfortunately, for better or for worse, like we talked about, the people mentally ill have been relegated to second-class citizens, and I think probably
like fifth class. But God, sorry.
Yeah. So I think some people listening say, well, they're better off in jail than in my neighborhood. But I guess at least what I've seen in my life is that mental health problems affect every family, every neighborhood, every community, every workplace. And so I'm curious from your clinical practice, what is the fallout that you see from, one person who has borderline personality or schizophrenia or manic depression? Like, what is the fallout? It's not that person is not an island, right? They affect everyone around them.
Well, first of all, I don't think it's humane to put anyone in jail instead of a hospital. That's not where we should be as a society. Get them out of my way, not in my neighborhood, whatever. That's just unacceptable. And I think that's part of what we need to change in national attitude and national policy. But you asked a really perfect question, which is, does this illness affect more than one person? And of course it does. These are brothers, sisters, children, parents, and 1 in 4, 1 in 5, depending on who you ask, families have someone there who has a mental illness. Substance abuse, we were talking about that earlier, affects 20% of the population. Something like schizophrenia and bipolar affect 2% of the population, 3% of the population. But, 50% of us need some psychiatric care at some point in our lives. So it's just like you need medical care. Who doesn't need medical care somewhere in their lives? So why should the mind be any different from the body? You know that. So this affects everyone, and it does affect families. And what's more, because of our society's abandonment of people with serious mental illness, guess who's responsible for these folks? The families. The families have to assume the burden, the financial burden, the social burden. And often if someone has a serious mental illness, to make matters worse, they don't know they're sick. They have something called anosognosia, which means if you're really, really psychotic and really ill, you often are the last person to know it. You're hearing voices, you're seeing things. You think it's real. You don't think it's imaginary. You don't say, help me, doctor, I'm sick. You say, I'm fine, leave me the heck alone. So, and all that burden, the social burden, the emotional burden, the financial burden, falls on the family. That's got to change. It's got to change.
We've talked about prisons. What about the homeless community? I've heard different people say different things. I was in San Francisco 5 or 6 years ago for the first time in a long time, and I was just shocked. I mean, we have this crazy situation in the U.S. where some of our most wealthy cities just have these just appalling homeless conditions. And
yeah, you know what the problem is there? Housing. Because that's why, because this happens in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, where the price of housing is astronomical. It's one of that, but it's also that, especially in California, we have closed the institutions. I mean, California led the nation in closing institutions. You can't blame this on any president, but if you could, you would start with Ronald Reagan. When he was governor in California, closed the institutions, and California was at the forefront of closing their asylums and mental hospitals. And there are many other factors involved, but that's one of the factors why the emergency rooms are overrun with psychiatric patients. The streets, and then becomes sort of a culture. I mean, being homeless and mentally ill is kind of what people do now. I mean, it's this has never been seen before, but now this is almost an acceptable thing that. I live on the Upper East Side of Manhattan where I have my addiction psychiatry practice. It's very common to see a homeless person, on the street, and a mentally ill homeless person at that. Almost every street in New York, you could find someone like that. So this has become acceptable. And as I keep on saying, and we write about in the book Bedlam, this is really not acceptable. This is not how we should be treating anyone, let alone our sickest citizens.
Ken, do you have any indication of a percentage, if we looked at Manhattan or if we looked at San Francisco, do we have any indication of what percentage of a homeless population would have what you classified as a serious mental illness, and compare that to prisons?
Yeah, the estimate is, it's hard to say, but, because it's really hard to get great numbers. But I think the most conservative estimate would be about a quarter. I think that, people might say, up to 80%, but I would say that a quarter of people who are there and homeless are, reliably, you could say they're there because of some serious psychiatric problem. It could be substance abuse. It certainly could be schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but that's how they got there, And by the way, once you're there on the streets and you experience all the trauma and the drugs and the chaos, just like when you're in jail with a problem, that doesn't make you healthier, right? You deteriorate worse, and you become, a devolving person who loses everything in the world.
You're working with writing and you're working with film. I'm curious, have your films have a bigger impact, or your writing have a bigger impact, or to be determined, or how are you feeling in terms of communicating your message?
I think it's to be determined. I think, this book, Bedlam, has gotten a lot of play. People are really interested in it. I think for the simple reason that it is among, if not the greatest social crisis of our time, but it's not one that people are aware of. So I think, the book has gotten a lot of play because people are like, really? I didn't know that. Just what you said at the start of the interview. Really, the jails or the new mental institutions? Yeah, they are. And that's not something that we're aware of. And also, as you said, this is not someone else's problem. This is our problem. This affects us. This affects our families. You can't get away from this.
Ken, we can't talk about jails without talking about men. I mean, it's disproportionately men. And from what I understand, men commit suicide at higher rates. I don't know that men have a higher mental illness, but this is a man's issue. Is that part of the reason it's harder to get support for it? Because historically we have had a privileged position. Is it difficult to get attention for men? Is that a factor, do you think, or?
I don't. It's an interesting hypothesis, a very good one, but I'm not sure it's something I'm aware of, honestly, because the homeless population, among the homeless population, if you're homeless female, you're much more likely to have a mental illness, frankly, and increasingly we see homeless women. I think that in terms of mental illness affects both men and women. Some illnesses like schizophrenia may affect men more. Certain illnesses like mood disorders may affect women more, but serious disorders affect both genders, and all genders, I should say, really. So I don't think you can really distinguish that way.
If you were to put a bunch of issues on the table, men, prisoners, mental health, I just can't imagine that would come to the top of people's list. And I mean this just objectively. If we had a bunch of social problems that we wanted to try to address as a political challenge, I just wonder. I just wonder in the hierarchy of needs. If for most people, if they were just going to shoot from the hip and pick one, I don't know that prison mental health is going to be on the top of their list. That's sad, but that was the first thing that hit, because I just think of jails and I just think of a bunch of men.
No, I hear you, but females are in jail too with mental illness. Very common.
But very few.
Transgender people are in jail with mental illness.
Yeah.
So this is not a gender issue, really.
Huh. Interesting. And so I guess I'd love to hear your idea of a better situation. Do you look at other countries who've handled this better? Do you look at other jurisdictions? Are there certain states that are doing better than others? Is there a light at the end of the tunnel?
Yeah, there is. There's definitely light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, just the fact that you and I are having this conversation is a demonstration that there's light. I mean, we're at a watershed moment. We, as a nation, as a world, are starting to think about this problem. You're talking to me from Barcelona. The World Health Organization has explained that mental illness will exceed that of the cost burden of all other non-communicable illnesses combined. So this is a problem nationally that we're really starting to deal with. And and internationally we're starting to deal with. There are some places that deal with it better. A wonderful place called Trieste, Italy. It's a World Health Organization exemplar for community mental health care, in which people go out into the streets, and they have a few psychiatric beds, which they hardly have any use for because they're on top of the issue. They also have something that we don't have in the United States, which is universal health care, and that's a big factor. They also, don't have a big drug problem, and they also have, intact families, so people are not abandoned the way they are in this country.
Well, Ken, thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate your work. For people listening who would like to pick up your book, who would like to check out your film, where should we send them?
You should send them to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere. You send them to the internet and Google Bedlam book, and you could buy it on Amazon or all those usual providers. Will be on PBS's Independent Lens in April. And you can also go to the website, which is Bedlam, BEDLAM film.com, bedlamfilm.com. Thanks so much for having me.
When I first started practicing yoga back in 2002, I was so stiff. I couldn't touch my toes. My fingers would come about halfway down my shins. When I sat on the floor, my knees were way up off the ground, my hips were so tight, and back bends were totally impossible. When I extended my arms above my head, that was already a really deep back bend for me. So I was really frustrated, and all my yoga teachers told me that yoga was not about flexibility, that I was focusing on the wrong things. And I got really frustrated because that was easy for them to say. They were already flexible. I was really struggling, and everything I did in yoga was about flexibility, because every single thing, whether it was sitting on the floor or any kind of basic forward bend, standing pose, anything really, I couldn't even begin to practice because I was so locked up. And so I started doing a lot of research. I started talking to a lot of people outside of the yoga community, specifically gymnasts and dancers, and people who are a little more comfortable talking about mobility training. And very quickly, I started to learn that in order to make flexibility gains, you really need to supplement your yoga practice. And even the yoga teachers I talked to who were very flexible, who developed it later in life, when I actually saw behind the curtains what was going on, all of them were doing supplemental stretching in the evening. And there were some things that all of these people, whether it was the gymnasts or the dancers or the yoga teachers who had discovered flexibility later in life, the things that I found consistently where they were doing practice outside of their practice, meaning supplemental stretching, all of them were using long hold passive stretches. And then very quickly I learned how to add a couple of other interesting things onto that practice, including breathing and time under passive tension. And essentially I came up with a protocol that really helps you to open up your body. I call it gravity yoga. I've been teaching it now for 12 years, something like that. And it's really, really effective for hamstrings, for locked up hips, for a stiff back, shoulders. And we've been teaching it to students all over the world. We teach it in my studios here in Barcelona. It's a very, very popular class. And for the first time ever, I'm having a gravity yoga teacher training. And it's an online program that teaches you how to work with clients in a 60-minute guided class, or how to work with athletes or CrossFitters or yoga students who are stuck in short bursts to supplement whatever else they're doing. So you can work privately or in yoga studios, fitness centers. I'm really excited about this program. It's heavy on anatomy and biomechanics. We dive deep into sequencing. We walk you through pose by pose exactly how to teach this, and we also give you all the why behind the how. It's really a great program. To learn more, go to gravityyogatraining.com. Course starts soon. I'm super excited. We have a listener question here from Betty, and Betty says, Lucas, what do you think of weight loss pills? I know you won't like this question, but I'm seriously considering them. I see them in the pharmacy, so I assume that they're safe or at least legal. What do you think? First thing you need to know is that just because something is in Walgreens or on Amazon doesn't mean that it's safe and doesn't mean that it's legal. The FDA has to go after companies based on size, and there are so many bad actors and so many offenders that they have to prioritize. There are right now definitely stuff showing up in mainstream pharmacies and certainly online that is illegal. Even some narcotic classification drugs are being sold illegally. And so just because something's available, I wouldn't trust it at all. What do people usually sneak into these things? Well, classically, weight loss pills have been some form or multiple forms, often some stack of amphetamines. And amphetamines are known to curb hunger, at least in the short term. If you've ever seen like the series Breaking Bad, right? All the tweakers are very thin, they're emaciated, they don't eat, right? If that's the look you're going for, well, crystal meth has a solution for you. I wouldn't encourage any of these things. In the short term, they can certainly curb your hunger, but it's at the negative effects are really, really strong. If you look at the clinical research around amphetamine-based weight loss, first of all, it's not very interesting. It gives people like a very small bump in their weight loss efforts, so maybe a 5%. Second thing is it's short term. And then the negative effects, like the risk to your heart and your mental health, your anxiety, imbalance in nervous system, disruption of sleep, it can lead to something else. So it's like, great, I lost an extra 1 pound in 2020, and I also have, a heart problem, right? It's not really a good way to go. And so I would encourage you to stay away from all of these. And despite how natural they sound, usually what they're playing off of is this same idea. That doesn't stop people from doing it. When I lived in New York City, I worked in theater quite a bit, and the stereotypical dancer would be out behind the theater smoking, and we'd be like, why are dancers smoking? Such great athletes. And inevitably, they would have these crazy pressures to stay underweight, and they used cigarettes to lose weight. And so, again, all of these things, weight loss pills, amphetamines, fen back in the 90s, this notorious prescription drug that gave people heart attacks. All of these things are playing on this same effect, and so there's lots of things that can work. A cocaine coffee diet that could definitely make you lose weight, but probably not the best choice. And it seems a little extreme to compare cocaine and coffee to some pills that you might buy at Walgreens. But it's just a dumbed down version. It's a stripped down version, and it's playing on the same mechanisms, just to a lesser extent. And it's not going to give you the benefits that you're looking for. In almost all cases, if all you did is take a walk around the block in the evening after dinner, you probably get a bigger bump in weight loss, and definitely a bigger bump in terms of health benefits. So I'd encourage you to stay away from these, and I have used and abused these things really, really heavily. So I have a lot of direct experience. This isn't just anecdotal experience, not in many, many years, but back in when ephedrine was legal, there was an ephedrine caffeine stack, which was extremely popular. This would have been in the late 90s, early aughts, and it really screwed up a bunch of people. And when I say screwed up, I mean like it really screws up your nervous system, and it's difficult to recover from. So I'd encourage you to stay away. Hope that's helpful. We have a question this week from a listener who sent us in via Instagram, and the question is, what is the best way to increase your flexibility? It's a very general question, but a very direct question. I'll try to give you a really direct answer. I've been obsessed with flexibility since I very first started practicing yoga, and I got really frustrated because most yoga teachers told me that flexibility didn't matter, and they told me that it would come with time, and they told me to focus on my breath. And all of these answers I felt like were giving me the runaround. And here's what I discovered, that flexible people, some of them have held on to their flexibility since their youth. Some of them developed flexibility through things like dance and gymnastics. And then other people are doing at-home supplemental stretching, including a lot of your yoga teachers who are really mobile. And what I mean by that is if you have a teacher who can put their foot behind their head, who can flip their legs into lotus position without using their hands, it's very likely that they're doing supplemental stretching at home. And here's what that looks like. Rule number 1 is wet noodle. So they're passively stretching. They're allowing their body to be completely relaxed because muscle tissue and fascia stretches best when your muscles are completely relaxed. Number 2 is they may or may not be using breathing, but it certainly helps to turn off your stretch reflex. There's other little tricks you can do as well. Breathing is by far the most accessible and consistent, and you slow down your breath. So we use an inhale through your nose to 4 and exhale through your mouth for 8. We use this breathing pattern. It's a whiskey breathing pattern to turn off your stretch reflex, helps you go deeper. And then rule number 3, this is the one that nobody ever does, and it's the deal breaker, so listen carefully, is you must meet or beat your hold time. Let's imagine that you're doing a passive forward bend We'll call it a ragdoll pose. Feet are about as wide as your hips. You're folding forward, hinging at the hips. Your knees are slightly bent to protect your lower back. And you're just hanging out, right? A forward bend. And you set a timer for 2 minutes today. And at the end of 2 minutes, you feel like you're about to die. Perfect. So 2 minutes is your new hold time. You need to meet or beat that. So next time you practice, 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 5 seconds. 2 minutes or 2 minutes and 10 seconds. If you carry on with these 3 rules, wet noodle, nose to mouth breathing, 4 to 8 count, and meeting or beating your hold time, you'll make huge gains very, very quickly. And by quickly, I mean within 4 weeks, you'll notice changes. Within 4 months, big changes. And within a year, if you keep up with this, you can get to 80% of your potential. If you'd like to learn more, we teach gravity yoga. We have an at-home gravity yoga program, and we even have a gravity yoga teacher training, which a bunch of you guys have done. You can check it out on our website. Hope that's helpful.
This week's iTunes review comes from Josiah L81 from the US. Josiah L81 says, I love getting the different perspectives on healthy living. Lucas brings in people from diverse knowledge bases in regards to health, diet, strength, supplements, stretching, and more. It is easy to listen to and there are great takeaways. Thanks Lucas and team, keep up the great work. Thank you Josiah L81, you have won the Yoga Trapeze. Please email us at podcast@yogabuddy.com and we will get it to you.
If you're a regular yoga talk show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabuddy.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month. Yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabuddy.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabuddy.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.